Grant did not campaign. He would not campaign. In fact, he even left Washington to be sure that people wouldn't get after him. He traveled west. But what did campaign were what were called campaign biographies. And there was one particularly wonderful campaign biography written in 1868 so that all Americans knew the story of Grant. They knew the struggles that he had gone through. They knew who Julia was. They knew this story backwards and forwards. And they came to so enjoy who he was compared to Andrew Johnson or James Buchanan or some of the kind of middling figures who had been the president way back to Andrew Jackson. And so, but his humility, his what I would call his self-effacement, that was more of a 19th century term, this was so endearing to people, as it became endearing to people on this world tour. And so he was not simply admired, he was really loved. And you can hear this and see it in the letters that people write, or even in writing their diaries. You can see it and hear it in the soldiers. They had so admired this. One of the most amazing stories to me is Grant leads the so-called Overland Campaign of May 1864. 4 times the Northern Army had invaded Virginia. 4 times it was forced to retreat. And after the terrible, terrible Battle of the Wilderness, 2 days in which 20,000 Union men are casualties, in which the scrub forest sets fire, men are burned to death, and men kill themselves before the fire will get to them. The question is, what will happen now? Will we retreat one more time? So Grant orders a night march. It's 8:30 in the evening. He's starting along the road with his huge horse, Cincinnatus. And as they come to this junction in the road, one junction turns south, the other junction turns north, and the soldiers all gather around. This is a momentous moment, and Grant gets to that junction. I have walked that junction, and Grant turns south. And the hats go in the air, and the cheering goes forward. Grant will not turn back. And that's what endeared him to the American people. Almost everyone recognizes his great role as Civil War general. John Keegan, the British military historian, the finest military historian, says quite clearly Grant is the greatest general this nation has ever produced, the greatest general certainly of the Civil War. But then we look to his presidency, and I would argue that his presidency and the scandals of the second administration, of which he was never touched, have somehow diminished everything else that he did in that presidency. So in that presidency, I wish to point out the fact that, first of all, as his own Republican Party was retreating from Reconstruction, Grant stood up staunchly for the rights of African Americans. He was willing to do whatever it took to do away with what I would call voter suppression. We think, and we've been told, that President Obama was the first American president ever elected with a non-majority white vote. Not true. Grant won the popular vote in 1868 only because 400,000 African Americans voted for him. By 1890, only 3,000 African Americans were allowed to vote in the South. The vote kept diminishing. But not because of Grant. He stood sternly for those African Americans, willing to do whatever it took to allow their right to vote. And they became his great friends. He also, in his first inaugural address, said, "We must reimagine the American Indian policy. What we have been doing here is absolutely immoral." And going against his military generals, his friends, Sherman and Sheridan, he asked if the Christian churches could step forward to help him reconstruct a new, fairer American Indian policy.